In this video, we're going to be using photographs to texture this hammer. So the hammer is already modeled and unwrapped. Let's take a look at its unwrap. So right here we have a big, huge square unwrap of the wooden handle. Then kind of the head of the hammer is broken up into these pieces right here. And as you can see, nothing is mirrored, stacked, overlapped. It's just a traditional unwrap. So now what we need to do is go hunting for images. So I would personally recommend to go to somewhere like textures.com. They have a lot of free textures. You can only download so many textures per day, but they also have paid subscriptions where you can download more. But again, from here you can just type in something like wood, hit enter, and then there's mass amounts of wood textures that you can go through. So you can select really any of these woods. Let's click on this guy, for example, and scroll down, and right here is going to be your image of the wood. So again, some of these, especially the ones with these spheres on them, as opposed to scrolling down these ones that are just images, these ones are going to have a little bit more complex maps to them. So let's look at this guy, for example. He's going to have the color map is the one that we're looking for this example, but they have these other maps like normal maps, gloss maps, roughness maps, etc. We're not going to worry about these for this project. So I already went ahead and I have a handful of references. So here's a few images of the kind of hammer that we're working with. And then this is just like a brushed steel. And then this is just that hickory material that we're probably going to be working with as far as the handle goes. So it'll be something like this. And all these images that I saved out are in a folder on my desktop called Images, and inside the Images folder is a folder called Hammer, and then all those are in here. So let's jump right into the Paint tab. We're going to use the projection tools to texture a lot of this. We might jump into Photoshop, but I'm guessing a lot of it we'll just do right inside of Modo. So looking at these, this one right here, the head of it is a little bit too shiny. I'm liking the handle. We could potentially use that to project from. This one's a little bit more rusty. I'm thinking we're going to go with a cleaner look, so we'll probably go with this one. And again, we don't want to have these words on here. So probably what I might do is just start with this hammer to kind of originally go off of, and then maybe use these two textures here, so this brushed steel and this hickory texture to kind of clean things up. So we're going to be using the paintbrush, Image Ink. Let's just go in that hammer folder, and we'll be using, if I'm not mistaken, this hammer right here. So double click him, left click in the viewport, image shows up. So I can either rotate this image, or if I want, I could rotate the hammer. It doesn't really matter which one we do. And again, my hammer might not match up perfectly to this one, but what I am going to do is I'm going to take the head of the hammer and I'm just going to hide that for right now. We'll re-enable all of our tools, and it remembers the orientation of where our hammer originally was. So now what I'm going to do is I need to have a texture applied to this hammer before I start painting. I can't just paint on nothing. So let's jump into the Images tab and create that image. So add clip, new image, and we're just going to go to the desktop, go to that Images folder that I had, open up Hammer, and we'll just put it right inside here for now. And we're going to make it a PNG, so we have that alpha channel or no pixels. We'll just call this hammer texture. Hit save, and let's actually just make this a 1024 by 1024. We don't need a lot of resolution in this. So again, now we have our empty texture right here, and again, you can tell it's empty because it has that gray and white checker pattern. And then this hammer image that we have in the viewport is just sitting right here as well, because we kind of added that to the scene. Jump to the shading tree. Our hammer has a text or a material called hammer. So I'm just going to do add layer, load image, and then I just want to go to my desktop, images, hammer, and pick that hammer underscore texture that we made. Hit open, and now it's applied. So before we get into this, I want you to notice one thing. I never really got off of the Paintbrush Image Ink tool. I wasn't playing in the 3D viewport. I was playing over here, changing textures, adding stuff. So that's why I can just leave all these settings as is. So now if I change my brush size, I can directly start projecting onto here. And again, if I go up too high, it's going to start painting that metal on there. It's not really a big deal. And we only get kind of one side of that hammer painted. So let's just disable our tool altogether. Just hit the escape key. And now let's look at this. So this side has some texture on there. Again, we're getting this logo on there. We really don't want that. We can maybe make our own logo. So now I can go back over to this side. Have that same image selected. And now I could reline this up. And again, since the image itself came in sideways, now my rotate tool, instead of it starting at the top, it's on the side, which isn't a big deal. And again, another weird thing that's kind of happening here is because of my recording software, my rotation tools are acting a little bit goofy on here. So something like this. Actually, let's rotate that a little bit more. There we go. And again, the painting is a little bit sluggish as well. Again, that's just because of those recording tools. So let's hit the escape key to disable that. And now let's see what we have going on. I'm going to turn the wireframe off as well. So again, on this, like the front and the back of the hammer, there's going to be a little bit of stretching. Some of it's just untextured, but the side is looking pretty good. The bottom is nowhere near where we want it. But I do like, I mean, it's not really in the right spot, but this little area of the hammer being darker is actually pretty cool. Some of those highlights we're getting are pretty cool as well. So let's actually go back to that Paintbrush Image Ink. And let's use this image now. So before I actually jump into actually using this image, and again, it's gonna need to be rotated and whatnot, there's one step that I want to do in Photoshop real quick to ensure that these kind of blend well together. So over in Photoshop, I'm just going to grab, this was the hammer that I was using, and this is kind of the desired wood that I want. So I'm just going to grab both of these images, throw them over here, and now what I want to do is I want to kind of color match this color of wood to this wood. So let's just take a section of this, put it over here, and see how well these match. I'll actually just rotate this so the grains are the same. So at this point, I don't want to change this one right here that I'm kind of turning on and off because I already projected that paint. I want to adapt this one to be closer to this one. So again, I could use color match. There's a bunch of things I could do. But what I'm going to do is just use hue and saturation. Maybe just modify these a little bit. So somewhere around there is fine. So again, we have it slid a little bit towards yellow. A little bit darker, a little bit more saturated. So again, to see that before and after, this is before. Again, our background wood's a little bit more red. Now it's a little bit closer to the one that we're shooting for. So let's just close this. Save this guy out. So we'll just call this wood adjusted. And then jump back into Modo. So Paintbrush, Image Ink. And now we kind of have the two. This one's neutral. This is one you can start seeing the name. It says the wood adjusted, or if I hover over it, it'll say wood adjusted. So this is the one that I want to select. So double click that, left click in the 3D viewport. Now there's a few things I want to know about wood in general. So the first thing is, one, wood's usually an easy thing to work with if you know the few things to kind of look for. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that your wood grain is going in the correct direction. So pretty much every hammer that's ever been made, the wood has gone with the handle, pretty much any handle that's wood, it goes up and down with the handle. So again, I wouldn't want to put this wood sideways and start painting on here. That's just not going to be how any handle's ever made, because again, let's undo that real quick. This hammer gets kind of swung back and forth this way. So the wood grain going up and down, if the wood grain was going sideways, it's not going to be as structurally sound if the wood grain was kind of going left and right. You wouldn't want to do a cross section of it. So just various reasons. So usually if you're doing anything with wood, just do just a tiny bit of research and make sure that your wood grain is going the right direction. And your other thing would be make sure that your wood grain is roughly the correct size. So again, if I zoom in on this and I kind of look and see kind of the spaces between these little rings of wood, I wouldn't want to do something like this. We'll just paint a little section of this and then zoom in on this, because how fine this detail is compared to this detail doesn't really match. We want that to be kind of as close as possible. So let's get some actual lines on there. I could actually make this quite a bit bigger. And we'll just move that out of the way. So again, if we kind of compare this back and forth, we have a bunch of little tiny lines and then a bunch of big thicker lines. We just want to make sure that these are a little bit more uniform. So just undoing that real quick. So the one thing that's probably going to happen is I might have too much wood effectively showing on this. I might not be able to get my image large enough for it to work out. So there's kind of a few things you could do. You could crop your image in Photoshop. You could just zoom out on your image itself. Doesn't really matter. And again, if you ever move your handle to where you really can't see it anymore, I can go over here, take the scale, drop this down to like something like 300, 120, make it whatever size is needed to where you can actually see it. Again, you could potentially even just reset it. Actually, let's do... So I just did 100, 100, so it'd go over and down a little bit. But again, if you just selected a different image and went back to this one, that size is going to reset for you. So somewhere around here, and the other thing that I want to kind of be mindful of, let's just look at this in Photoshop again, is there's actually boards in here. Let's grab a color to where there's actually a board right here, board, board. So I just want to kind of be mindful of all these little seams when I'm working with this. So to make our life easier, let's actually just crop this image, staying away from the seams and getting a nice tall section of wood. So from here to here will be fine. So let's save this out as just wood handle. So again, this image, this guy right here, I don't really need anymore. So we'll just select this wood handle image instead. And we'll scale that down. So this should probably be easier to work with. So what I'm going to want to do is kind of a few things. One, I want to make sure that I'm using this soft brush over here, because again, if I use a hard brush and I try to color some wood where there's other wood, it's just going to be a hard difference between the two. So if I use a soft brush, maybe drop the opacity a little bit, I'm going to have an easier time blending the woods together. And again, you can just do kind of a test stroke on there, move it over, zoom in and look at it. And realistically, that's looking pretty nice. So this is something that you can kind of just have fun with. And again, since I'm using a lower opacity on these top portions where there's this metal, I'm kind of putting wood over top of metal with an opacity. So I just need to make sure that I do a few strokes to get that in there. And then just go ahead. And right now, I'm not really super focused on my wood grain pattern and whatnot. I just want to kind of almost get a base color of what's going on with this wood. I might get lucky and everything just works out, but realistically, before I start focusing on actual wood grain, I want to just effectively get rid of all the white and kind of bad colors that are going on here. And again, it's usually pretty good to have this, instead of having it set to default, have it set to texture so you can see the flat colors. Control 1, hover over this little guy that says toggle wireframe and then let go of Control and 1. We'll get rid of your wireframe. So this one, there's this white highlight here. When I paint on this, this is actually going to get rid of that white highlight, but it's going to blend stuff together. But I should pretty easily be able to get that white highlight back. I can just manually put that in. So again, there's a little bit of blurry textures going on right here. So again, just low opacity, low brush stroke. And again, I'm trying to utilize multiple portions of this wood. I don't want to just keep hitting right here on the texture, because it'll just be that same pattern repeating over and over again. And saying wood is pretty forgiving, to where I just blended this with down here. It's blending somewhere around right here, but again, with that lower opacity, it's going to realistically be pretty believable. So again, just looking, trying to find error spots. This spot right here looks really bad. You can see it's kind of just stretched texture, so that's just a spot that I missed to touch up. Just enable our brush again. There we go, that looks a lot better. And for this top portion up here, it's going to be hidden in the hammer. So actually what I'm going to do is let's just grab, because I don't want to have any overpaint happening and paint on polygons I don't mean to. So we'll just isolate these polygons, bring our brush back up, paint, that's a little bit too much for scale, so we're just going to bring it in a little bit bigger. Try that again, and that should probably be just fine. So Control U to unhide, so you don't want the hammerhead yet. Let's go ahead and get the bottom portion as well. So yeah, let's grab just that. Match the size here. And again, this one, probably the color isn't going to be right, but we can adjust that later. So again, a little bit of white showing through down here. So let's actually grab this bottom portion and just hide that. And another easy way to do this is if I bring up my UV menu. And again, I have a hotkey for this, but if you go to Texture, UV Editor, I can just grab my UV sections down here. It might be easier to select these, especially when your texture is visible. Hide what you don't need. Throw this off onto another screen. So again, I really like this darker color that's coming down here, so we'll actually go back to that other hammer image and see if we can't manipulate that to get it where we want it. So again, we're seeing some stretching right here. And again, that's just from the projection that was going sideways. Let's get some of this varied up texture down here. There we go. Looks a lot better. And again, I really don't want this logo on here either. Let's go ahead and get rid of that logo. So let's jump back to this hammer image and see if we can't get this to where we can use the bottom portion. Oops, I didn't want to paint, I wanted to actually move it. It looks like that's probably going to be a little bit too hard just to line that up perfect. We might get lucky. Again, we kind of have two things that are kind of fighting against us, and that's probably not going to work out. So let's just disable image ink, go back to our airbrush, and we'll just manually do this. So again, wood is pretty forgiving. We even have some kind of stretching going on right here. So what I'm actually going to do is just kind of hand paint this. So it's kind of bringing your hand painted skills in with texture. So again, I have my airbrush selected. I have that 70% opacity. Now I can just hover over the color that I want, middle mouse click, and it'll grab that color. And now I can just do a bunch of little brush strokes going kind of up and down to simulate the striation in those woods. And again, you can change your opacity wherever you want. You might want to turn the wireframe on, because realistically I want to have this whole area be that darker hammer scenario. So I could maybe even go in and preemptively color and darken this. Really depends on what you're going for, because chances are you're never going to get this close to this hammer in a game or something, unless it's a game where you're running around on a hammer as like an ant. But something like this will be fine. Now I can color pick, maybe even grab that same color, make it a little bit darker. And then from here I can just adjust my opacity. So again, this is going to be that touch-up process of kind of making things exactly how you want it. And again, we could change our brush size, change colors. But realistically, as long as we get a little bit of kind of noise going on down here, maybe color pick, still have that low opacity. Let's actually drop it down a little bit more to like 20%. Now we're just working some of those lighter colors in here. And again, you could do another pass that has some of the darker stuff. Maybe mix a little bit of more orange. Like here we got a little bit more orange and red going on. Again, I'm not going to spend all day on that. But as soon as I zoom out, turn that off, that looks just fine. So I am liking the lighter color that's going on here. You can see it's kind of in the yellows. It's a little bit lighter. So let's drop our opacity all the way down to 10%. And now what I want to do is I want to hit these, if I look at this from the bottom, the kind of corners of this hammer. So again, I'm actually going to do it. I can kind of see this is the line that I want to work with. So I can either just follow that up, or I can even hit this at a glancing angle and just really lightly. Again, I'm using a pen, so I have that pressure sensitivity. If I do just a little bit of light strokes. It's just going to bring up the corners of this hammer a little bit. And again, my techniques, I usually don't like to switch colors if I'm kind of doing the same thing in different spots. So again, I'm sticking with this yellow color, and I'm going to hit all the corners, and then I'm going to jump to a little bit more of a whiter color, and then hit the remaining corners. And again, I'll probably end up color picking from those right there. I'm really liking those. So that area is already kind of painted, so I'll just kind of skip over that one. And again, since we're doing this at such a low opacity, it's working in our favor. The other thing we could do would be switch to more of a white color and switch our layer style to like an overlay. That would probably work out well also. And again, the other thing you'll probably notice is all of my paint strokes are going up and down. They're going with the grain of this wood. If I start going left and right, you're going to see that worked into the wood. And we're trying to kind of mask our brush strokes because we want to make this look a little bit closer to something more photorealistic as opposed to something that's hand painted. Because again, we're using, or at least our starting point were those photo textures. So something like that. So we kind of have some stuff going on here. Just some overpaint effectively from where we were projecting stuff. Not really a big deal. Oops. So it looks like our brush was too big when we were doing that. Let's actually check our textures and make sure that we don't have overlap in our UVs. That was happening right here. So it's saying that this one... Okay, so these ones are just close. So what I can do is just have a smaller brush size when I'm doing this. Oops, I'm on the wrong tab. We need to go back to the paint tab. So now we'll move on to painting this hammerhead. So a quick thing that I just noticed is, let's actually jump into the UV tab. We have our hammer texture selected over here, backdrop, current image selection. I just had those defaulted. So if I actually look at this, let's make our hammer visible. What's happening is some padding is getting shot out. So we're getting this that was coming up on the hammer. I just hit the undo operation a few times. So what's happening is this is just kind of kicking out extra pixels, and that's just our normal padding setting. So in one of the previous videos, you probably remember we changed the bake settings. So under preferences, final rendering, bake UV border size, this was set to 64 pixels, so this texture was kicking out an extra 64. So I'm just going to take that down to something like 16. Close that. Again, I was in system preferences. If you're on a Mac, you'd want to go over here and go to Modo preferences. So now, hopefully, go back to the paint tab. If I was to erase this guy, jump back to that UV tab and look at this. So yeah, now it's giving me the correct amount of padding here. It's not kind of fighting itself. So that should work out just fine. Is there? Okay. So at this point, I don't have any color filled in for this hammer. So let's jump to the paint tab. We'll try to do this one a little bit quicker. Paintbrush, project. Let's just use that same hammer image. And what I'm going to do is actually, I'll try to project this hammer from the side. Again, our geometry doesn't line up perfectly because they're not really the same hammer. It actually lines up pretty well. Just want to knock my opacity up to 100, actually change my color to white. So changing it to white, I can either try to change it in here to white, or I can actually take these sliders right here, and as I'm sliding them left and right, you're seeing the RGB values change. So I can slide all of them up to 1, or if some of them are slid down, if I hold the shift key and click any one of these three, all three are going to slide at the same time, so they'll all slide up to 1, so I get perfect white. So now I can click and drag on this to fill it in. And again, this isn't a perfect scenario. I'm just doing this initially. I might actually be able to work with it pretty well, but what I want to do is just kind of pick a color, and I want to fill this entire hammer. And actually, we can redo that side projection. I just want to do this realistically to make sure that my padding is working, but also to make sure I don't have any empty pixels in this when I finalize that texture. I don't have a top image of the hammer. Again, you can go online and look for more images. But realistically, once we have the side done, we can kind of use that other brushed metal to take care of the top. So we'll call this good. So let's get this hammer back to where it was. Actually, let's check that padding real quick just to double check. So yeah, this is going out. Everything's working just fine. Again, it's not giving me the padding right here. It's giving me a pixel. So again, that's just Modo being a little bit weird. So probably inside of Photoshop, I can take this little section right here, and I can, well, I picked the wrong color. But regardless, I can probably, actually I still have go to my brush settings, turn image ink off. Now go over here, color pick. And realistically, I would just do this scenario in Photoshop. It's not a big deal, but I can just go around and see any of those areas that aren't giving me a good amount of padding and adjust those. And again, I'm not going to make this entire thing perfect because it's just more of a demo. So now that we know that that's working just fine, unhide, look at the whole hammer, and undo. Okay, we should be good on that. So image ink, image is selected, click, move, and let's get this guy into place. And again, I'm just moving the geometry because it's a little bit easier than manipulating the image. You can kind of do whatever you prefer. So something like that. There we go. Actually, I'm painting with the wrong color, so again, let's shift that to white. So again, that's a common thing. And again, I'm getting a little bit of lag when painting, and that's solely because of the recording software that I'm using. So I can flip this image. So this guy I'm going to do flip, actually I'm going to do flip vertical because I already rotated it 90 degrees. So let's line this one back up. And again, it's probably not going to line up perfectly. Actually, rotating it would help out a little bit. There we go. And again, I'm guessing you guys are getting the gist of this. So we'll try to speed up the process a little bit. So that should work. So now let's switch to our brushed aluminum. And kind of the cool thing with this texture is it has kind of darker areas and lighter areas. So let's actually position on the X. Oops, that was not the number I wanted. Let's do 500 and 500, and that's just to get this back to where we wanted it. And we'll scale it down a little bit. So the other thing, before I paint on this, again, I just want to color match this. So we already know this process. And I'm just going to save over the existing image instead of making a new one. So I just need an example of this brushed metal area. So let's grab a few different colors. There we go. So again, ours looks a little bit more red. It's got some reds and oranges in there. So I'm just going to hit colorize, desaturate that quite a bit. And the other thing you can do is I'm just going to oversaturate this so I can make sure that I'm hue shifting correctly, and then I'll desaturate. So somewhere around in here should be fine. So again, hues at 37, saturation's at 10, colorize is on. Now I can delete this layer, zoom out. Actually, just going to desaturate it just a little bit. These areas are getting a little too dark. And the other thing I might as well do, I'm just going to do black, switch to my gradient tool, and it's going from black to kind of nothing. New layer, click, and oops, we want a linear gradient. Do something like this. Set it to a soft light. Now we just have a darker section over here just in case we need it for whatever reason. So we'll save over this. So dropping back in here, you see that that updated automatically. Now we're on the top of our hammer. So let's actually make a little highlight right in the center. Let's actually make this image a little bit smaller. So just being really careful. Just painting that. Now we want to get the front of this. And again, we want to make sure that our size is lined up pretty good. And again, I'm using a soft brush. I'm just using kind of a light brush stroke. Let's get underneath here. We'll actually utilize that darker gradient again. So again, this you can be a little bit more meticulous with it. Just for time's sake, I'm trying to go a little bit faster on this. Let's actually get our opacity down. Something like that. So let's just turn our image ink off. We'll probably touch up the rest by hand. So again, this, ideally we'd probably have a highlight here, so let's pick this. And again, just, oops, we have way too much opacity. Take that down to something like 10. Kind of just going with the frame. And again, if we had a top image of a hammer, we could make this a little bit more precise and just reference off of that image. Again, just color picking to kind of match these back and forth. And again, there's some areas that kind of got neglected a little bit right there. It's not a big deal though. And again, you can just color pick this. So from here, I wouldn't say that this is done by any means, but I'll let you guys finish this up. Again, it'd probably be a little bit darker in here. Again, later we'll utilize like ambient occlusion bakes and whatnot. But for this example, I'm going to call this good just so the video is not as long. But you'll probably want to just touch this up a little bit. Again, just paying attention to colors, trying to match those. Highlights, you can maybe even put your own text in there, just add it in Photoshop. But again, something like this will be good for this assignment. So the last thing that you're going to need to do, and don't forget this step, is I'll save my Modo file out. So File, Save As, just have it on the desktop right now. I'll move it somewhere else later. Hammer 01, save, yes. So the big thing, if I was to close Modo right now, it's going to say, do you want to save changes to hammer texture.png? I'm just going to hit cancel. So if I was to hit don't save on that, all this work I did for this texture is absolutely gone. There's no way to get it back. So what you need to do is either this prompt, have it just say yes, and then wherever you originally saved it, it'll be saved, or jump to this Images tab, find the hammer texture you're working with. So ours right here, hammer texture. All these other images are just kind of referenced in the file because we use those for Image Ink, but this is the one that we want, hammer texture, and it has that little asterisk next to it, next to the last letter of the word. And that just means it hasn't been saved yet. So I can hit right click and either hit save or save as. Save as lets me choose a destination. So I'll just leave it in this hammer folder. Save, yes. Now when I jump into that hammer folder, I have that hammer texture right here. You can see that it has the little bit of padding baked in. You might need to kind of babysit that, like there's little corners here where Modo didn't really do a good job of the padding scenario. And that technically could have been me not painting this bottom pixel in or something like that. So that's why it's usually might be good to start with a fill tool as opposed to just painting it in. But regardless, save this texture out, save your 3D file out, and you'll be all set for this assignment.